My name is Rachel, and I'd like to share my experience with you. It was a tough time for me. It's surprising how things can spiral out of control when you least expect it, and how someone you trust can suddenly become someone you don't know. It all began in such an innocent way. My husband, Michael, and I had been married for 8 years. We had a great home, great careers, and the most lovable golden retriever, Max, who was like a child to us. But as is the case with all relationships, our marriage hit a rough patch. We were still together, but we'd grown apart emotionally. Michael was working late, and I often felt like I was being left out and like I was disappearing in my own home. I didn't realize how vulnerable I was until John came into the picture. John was my husband's best friend and often came over to our house. He'd been part of our lives for years. He and Michael played basketball together, and we often shared meals. We had dinner together, chatting about everything from life to sports to work. As time went on, John and I started to connect in a way that felt different from before. It wasn't something we set out to do. We have a good laugh together, and we joke around a lot. I started to look forward to seeing John when he came over. Those casual conversations started to become more personal. We'd talk about the things that frustrated us in life. Before I knew it, I found myself sharing things with JN that I hadn't even told Michael. I found myself sharing things with John that I hadn't even told Michael. I'll admit I was flattered by the attention. John was quick to notice the little things, like my new hairstyle or the way I styled my clothes. Things that Michael had stopped noticing long ago. It felt good to be noticed again and to feel important. But I never thought it would go any further. That's what I told myself, anyway. One evening, things took an unexpected turn. It was a typical Friday night. Michael had to stay late at work again, so JN came over to help me with some repairs around the house. Max was his usual excited self, jumping around, wagging his tail, and barking happily at John's arrival. Everything seemed normal, but there was a different vibe between John and me that night. It was the way he smiled, the way his hand brushed against mine when he handed me a tool. We had a good laugh as we fixed a broken cabinet in the kitchen, but there was a growing sense of tension. At first, it was just a subtle difference in energy, but after we finished the repairs, we sat on the couch with Max between us, watching some random show on TV. The atmosphere felt heavy, as if something was about to happen, but neither of us was ready to take the initiative. Then something happened. I'm not sure how to describe it. One minute we were just sitting there, and the next thing you know, JN reached over and put his hand on mine. It wasn't hostile, but it wasn't friendly either. It was different. I should have taken my hand away from his. I should have stood up and asked him to leave, but I didn't. Instead, I let it happen. His touch sent a chill down my spine, and for a moment, I forgot about the consequences. My mind seemed to go blank, and all I could feel was the warmth of his hand on mine. Max shifted slightly, but stayed put at our feet, as if he sensed something was amiss. Then I came to my senses. The front door opened, and Michael came in. John quickly took his hand away, and I got up off the couch. I was feeling pretty guilty. It all happened so fast, but there was a real sense of tension in the air. "Hey, I'm home," Michael said, setting his keys on the table. "What's going on?" I spoke up, but my voice was a little too high. "We were just watching TV." John stood up, looking just as uncomfortable as I was. I was just about to head out. Michael didn't seem to notice the awkwardness between us, or maybe he was just too tired to care. He walked over to Max and started petting him. For a moment, I thought we were in the clear. Perhaps Michael hadn't noticed anything. Maybe this could be. I thought it would blow over and we'd never have to talk about it again, but I knew that wasn't going to happen. There was a change in the dynamic between John and me. It was something that couldn't be undone. We hadn't crossed the line physically, but we were already on the brink of something emotional. I was really worried about what was going to happen next. As John left that night, he gave me a look that showed he was feeling the same way. From that point on, I knew this wasn't over. The days that followed were a bit of a blur, to be honest. I was confused and felt guilty. I couldn't stop thinking about John. I thought about his touch, his presence, and the way he made me feel. I felt like he was paying attention to me, but every time I thought of him, I felt guilty. Michael hadn't done anything wrong. He was a good husband, just a bit distracted. And he was tired, yes, but he didn't deserve to be treated this way behind his back. I tried to put it out of my mind, telling myself it was just a moment of weakness. But no matter how much I tried to put it out of my mind, John was always there. He'd send me random texts, like asking how I was doing or if Max had been behaving. It wasn't overtly flirtatious, but the subtext was clear. He hadn't forgotten that night either. I knew I should have ignored him, but I didn't. The truth is, I liked the attention. Each time I replied, I felt even worse about myself. I felt like I was playing with fire, but I couldn't stop. One evening, Michael invited John over for dinner, which was the last straw. He said it had been a while since the three of us had spent time together, and I couldn't really argue with that. I put on a smile and acted like everything was normal, but inside I was a wreck. The dinner was a bit awkward, at least from my perspective. Michael and John were their usual selves, chatting about sports and sharing stories about work, but I couldn't focus. Every time John looked at me, I felt like he could see right through me, and every time Michael smiled at me, I felt like I was on the spot. After dinner, we moved to the living room, with Max following along behind us as usual. John sat down on the couch, and I paused for a moment before sitting next to him, making sure to keep a noticeable distance between us. Michael was in the kitchen cleaning up, unaware of the tension between John and me. Then, in a moment that I'll never forget, Max jumped up onto the couch right between John and me, just like he had the night before. He was wagging his tail, completely unaware of the emotional situation in the room. John chuckled and reached over to pet him, and for a split second, his hand brushed against mine again. It was like déjà vu, but this time, I pulled away instantly. My heart was beating fast in my chest. I couldn't keep doing this. I got up quickly, surprising John and Max. I went to help Michael in the kitchen. I was really nervous and told them I needed to step out for a moment. I felt like the walls were closing in, and I was suffocating under the weight of my own guilt. John didn't say anything, but he just nodded. I found Michael drying dishes and humming softly to himself. He seemed so calm and unaware of the emotional situation unfolding behind him. I watched him for a moment, and I felt a sudden rush of guilt. This was all wrong. Everything about this was wrong. "Hey, could I have a quick word with you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Michael turned to me, his smile fading when he saw the look on my face. "What's up?" I paused, my mind racing. Should I be honest with him? Should I come clean and risk losing him forever? But as I stood there, I realized that I couldn't go through with it. As I looked into his eyes, I realized that I couldn't not like this. The truth would be too much for him, and I wasn't prepared for that. I wasn't ready to jeopardize our relationship. "I've just been feeling a little off lately," I said, forcing a smile. "The work has been pretty intense lately." Michael relaxed, clearly relieved. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right?" He gave me a hug. "I'm here for you." Embrace was like a lifeline, pulling me back from the brink. In that moment, I made up my mind. I was going to put an end to whatever was going on with JN. I couldn't keep putting myself in this risky situation, risking everything for something that wasn't worth it. But things didn't work out that way. The next day, I sent JN a text to set up a meeting. I wanted to be clear that this needed to stop. I wasn't going to risk my marriage over it. It was just a passing attraction, but it felt strong. He said he'd meet up, but instead of suggesting a public place, he asked if he could come over when Michael wasn't home. I was a little hesitant at first, but I agreed when John arrived. Max greeted him as usual, not noticing the tension in the air. I led John into the living room, ready to have a serious talk. I needed to establish some boundaries. I needed to put a stop to this before it went any further, but John had other ideas. As soon as we sat down, he got pretty close. His eyes met mine. "Rachel, I can't stop thinking about you," he admitted. His voice was low and intense. My heart was racing, but I shook my head. "John, this isn't right. I think we need to stop this. I love Michael." He reached for my hand again, but I couldn't help how I felt in the moment. I took a step back. I pulled my hand away and stood up to give us some space. We need to put a stop to this. We can't keep doing this. John stood up too, looking frustrated. Rachel, you feel it too, I'm sure. Before I could say anything, I heard the front door unlock and I got really nervous. Michael got in early. I wasn't expecting him for another hour. John was taken aback. His eyes were wide with shock. I could hear Max barking. I heard Michael come in from the hallway and my heart started racing. I knew there was no way to explain what was going on without it looking bad. Michael came into the living room and seemed pleased to see me. But then he noticed John, and his expression changed. He looked from me to John and back to me again, and his brow furrowed. What's going on? Michael asked. I started to speak, but I couldn't think of what to say. I just couldn't bring myself to say anything. I felt terrible, and I knew there was no way to explain this without it sounding like exactly what it was, a betrayal. John, sensing the tension, jumped in. I was just heading out, he said, in a casual tone. I stopped by to see how Max was doing. Michael's eyes narrowed as he looked between us. He wasn't convinced by the excuse. Why would you need to check on Max when Rachel's home? The room was quiet. At that moment, I realized that no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't undo what had already happened.